Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much to all of our listeners for tuning in. We are so grateful to have our Voice and Visibility Women's Summit community here, our partners from SoGal, an incredible organization committed to closing the diversity gap in entrepreneurship and in investing. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in tonight. I'm really thrilled to present this very special segment. I am joined by three exceptional women in this segment, Let's Lawyer Up. So these three well-known and respected attorneys are from the Williams Parker Law Firm, and they're based here in Sarasota, Florida, but have clients all across the country. As we strive to equip and empower women with opportunities for success in their businesses, discussing important legal considerations is an absolute must. Full disclosure, these beautiful and brilliant women are the official legal counsel for the Voice and Visibility Women's Summit, and their professional expertise is something on which our team depends, and we're incredibly grateful for it. So thank you. Now, those who know me know I'm kind of a data geek. So in preparing for this segment and doing a little homework before I get to interview these three attorneys, I wanted to share some data about women in law. Okay, so I was looking at a study from the American Bar Association. It was called Women in Law, published in 2019. And here are just a couple facts that I wanted our listeners to know. According to the American Bar Association, of the entire legal profession, 38% are women and 62% are men. 30% of legal counsel for Fortune 500 companies are women and 70% are men. Globally, male partners are paid 27% more than female partners. And according to this study, of law school deans in America, 35% are women and 65% are men. So now we get to talk to these three trailblazing women, and we're going to do three kind of mini micro segments and get to know their expertise and their subject areas. And again, I'm just so grateful for all of you that are tuning in. I have to say, I love attorneys. I love lawyers. I want to give a shout out to Shannon Nash, who was my very first attorney as an entrepreneur and held my hand. And really, truthfully, for us as women in business, it is absolutely critical to surround ourselves with experts like this. So today we've invited these three attorneys to share their wisdom with us. We have Nicole Behar, Gail Farb, and Elizabeth Stamoulis, and they're going to educate us about legal essentials as it pertains to business operations. So again, I am ready to get started. Nicole, I'm so excited to introduce our listeners to you. Allow me to share a little bit about Nicole's background. Incredibly impressive. So Nicole is counsel with Williams Parker Litigation Group. Nicole attended Georgetown University before obtaining her JD from Catholic University of America. Following law school, Nicole worked as an assistant state attorney for the 12th Judicial Circuit of Florida before returning to Georgetown University Law School to obtain her LLM in tax. In the firm's litigation group, Nicole represents business owners and employers in a variety of business-related disputes. I'm just gonna have to say, like, you're incredible. So before we dive into all this, Nicole, I have to ask, I'm gonna ask the litigation questions, I'm gonna get there, but I really honestly need to know your journey with law school. Is law school as grueling as the word on the street is, that it is just so intense and so labor intensive? What was your experience like pursuing your law degree?
I would definitely say it's labor intensive. You really have to be committed, but I would also say it was one of the best times of my life. Wow. So I met some amazing people that I'm still very close with, who are in amazing professions right now. But I will say the hardest thing that I ever did, aside from childbirth, was taking the bar. So.
I mean, and okay, for those of us that are moms, like, the childbirth is a whole separate category, but that's what my understanding is that just the rigor, the amount of reading and studying and memorization was intense. And so when you were in law school, in your 20s. When did you go?
My mid-20s.
Okay.
So.
Wow. And Georgetown, nonetheless. So I'm sure our listeners know Georgetown is obviously one of the top law schools. All right. So the next question, and I wonder if you can speak a little bit to this. You know, I referenced some data with the American Bar Association that there's still more men in your profession. Why do you think there is a little bit of an imbalance in law, more men, and why is there still a little bit of a pay imbalance? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that although a number of women are graduating law school and the numbers go up and up and up every year, I think that in terms of the disparity between male and female partners, I think that there's a couple reasons. I think that there's still a hidden bias that pervades our society, where, for example, when women are evaluated, performance evaluations, frequently they're described as compassionate, whereas their male counterparts can be described as analytical. Those are certain words, those are little things that are just hidden in our psyche. And I think that that really needs to change in order for women to, for more women to become partners. But I also think that a lot of women want to have children. And so that's also going to impact them. It's really difficult to maintain the number of hours that are expected from you at a firm while also having a family and being there for your children. So I think that firms need to consider how your family or how their family leave policy impacts women.
Great. I think that's such a perfect example of how we can look to encourage firms and those in the profession to have supportive policies for family leave that allow strong female attorneys to ascend in their profession. So I think that is such a relevant conversation to so many women in so many sectors, but certainly it sounds like in law, incredibly relevant because of the hours you guys have to achieve. So let's begin with saying, you know, in your opinion, you know, what are some of the reasons why women in business, whether they're entrepreneurs or managers or climbing up the ladder, why must we have legal counsel?
Well, I think that having legal counsel sets you up for success. There are so many pitfalls in business, whether it's when you're transacting business, whether when you are hiring employees. The law is going to permeate just about every aspect of your business. And so planning for it at the get-go is really going to save you time, money, and expense in the long run. And that's why having valuable legal counsel is still important.
It's so important. And I think I've seen it certainly in the entrepreneurial community. Many of us, you're starting up, your budgets are so lean. And I've seen folks that don't put kind of legal counsel into their budget. And I think it's a huge mistake. I think there are ways, I mean, to find legal resources. And like you said, setting that foundation from the beginning is critical. So Nicole, how do you want our listeners to prioritize documentation, right? So how does documentation help an attorney when you're working with a business leader?
First and foremost, I think that it helps any business owner when you are beginning to draft your documents, when you're working with your attorney to draft your documents. As distasteful as it is, you need to think about what's going to happen when things go wrong. And most civil litigation is going to involve contract disputes, that's breach of contract, tortious interference, things like that, employment law disputes. They're all going to be contract based. And what entrepreneurs need to realize is that when it comes to the law, your contract is the law of the case. And that's where the court's going to start, or with whatever determining body you end up choosing. So starting with that premise can help you anticipate litigation in the future and protect you and your business in the future. Some things that you might want to consider when you're drafting your contract are defining what a breach is. What is a breach? What is a default? Is there a cure period if there's a default? What is the cure period? What is the notice? What is the notice that's required to be given? These are certain things that you need to think about, and they all work together. Another thing that you should think about are, what are the remedies in the event of a breach? Are you only having, is your contract only going to address damages? Let's say if you're selling something for the loss of those goods, are there going to be consequential damages? Are consequential damages prohibited? These are all certain things that you need to think about that can really reduce your risk exposure in the long run.
Yeah. I think that's such critical advice. And I'm really, again, particularly for our young and our startup community, hoping you guys are taking Nicole's advice to heart, because taking the time in the beginning of the journey is so critical to establish those contracts and with your legal experts. And so why should a business consider litigation even before a dispute arises? Nicole, talk to us about your thoughts on that.
Most people have no idea how expensive litigation can get.
Yeah.
It can ruin a business. And that's really unfortunate if you don't plan for it. There are certain things that are out there, such as general business insurance, which most business owners know about. And you would think about that as slip and fall sort of things, personal injury sort of claims. But there's a number of other business insurances that are out there that can protect you in the event that you're sued. One of them is employment practices insurance. If you have employees and they end up suing you, or your business, I should say, for wrongful termination, for sexual harassment, for discrimination, your general businesses practices insurance is going to step in, and they can facilitate your defense in those actions, whether they have in-house attorneys or they contract with firms like ours to help defend you and protect you. Another thing that people don't really realize is that after a claim is filed against you or by you, there's this whole process that goes on before you get to that final trial or that final hearing, and that's called discovery. And it's really, really expensive, and it can last years. And what discovery is it's an exchange of documentation. It's also depositions, things like that, to help facilitate the claims process.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that leads me to this next question, which is, how do we differentiate ourselves from our business? How does an entrepreneur protect their own assets and their business? What do we need to know about that?
It's not enough to just have an LLC. I think that that's what most people think.
Yes.
And if I have that, it's going to protect me. And on one level, it does add a level of protection. But we're going to circle back to the beginning of our conversation, and that really goes into your planning. You don't want to have your business end up being or deemed to be your alter ego, because then that will put you at risk. And so the best way to protect yourself is with your planning documents, with your business practices that you work with your attorney on, to really differentiate you from your business so that you won't be liable.
Yeah, that's key. So, okay, I could keep you all day, but I have one more question before we get to meet some of your partners. And that is, what can we do now to offset or reduce our liability for the future? What should business owners, what do you want us to do?
I would say first and foremost, plan. Expect the unexpected. And just remember, your contracts are going to be the law of your case in the event that you are sued in the future, or you need to sue somebody in the future. Yeah. And that's the best way to protect yourself now, that and business insurance.
Planning, business insurance. Oh my goodness. Okay. So Nicole, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being part of our community. I look forward to our listeners getting to know this team even more. And we're going to have Nicole's contact information as well as the Williams Parker team at the end of the video. Thank you for being with us tonight, Nicole.
Thank you.
All righty. Well, thank you, Nicole. I'm just so thrilled to introduce a colleague of Nicole's. Our next feature is with Gail Farb. And Gail, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to give our listeners a little bit of background. I love reading these bios. Honestly, there's just so much work behind their bio. So allow me to share Gail's background. Gail is a labor and employment attorney with Williams Parker. She advises management clients regarding preventive measures in employment matters and defends single plaintiff cases and collective actions in administrative and court proceedings. Gail is AV preeminent rated by Martindale-Hubbell and has been repeatedly named to Florida super lawyers for employment and labor. After graduating from Duke University, Gail received her JD from Emory University School of Law. As a lifelong performing artist, you may have seen Gail on many of our Sarasota stages. She performed in the Nutcracker, Swan Lake, and other ballets. But most recently, she can be found raising butterflies and attending to her butterfly garden. Oh my gosh, I love that. I feel like we might need to sneak in a photo of her butterfly garden for you all, for our listeners. But Gail, incredibly impressive background. And thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to dive right in because you really have this employment law expertise. And a large majority of our listeners are women. We certainly love when our male friends and supporters tune in. But here's my first question. So as the current climate demands employers gain proficiency in diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to talk specifically about women in the workplace, right? I want to talk about equal pay and preventing sexual harassment. Can you tell us in basic legal terms, what laws help women to secure equal pay and protect women from harassment in the workplace? Loaded.
Sure, and thank you for having us here today. And I'm happy to share this type of law with you all and have been doing it for 25 years. So the laws that protect women in terms of harassment and equal pay include the federal law, which is Equal Pay Act of 1963. Mm-hmm. And the other one is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then the second one prohibits discrimination because of sex, whereas the first directly addresses equal pay.
Wow.
The states themselves also have laws. In Florida, we have the Florida Civil Rights Act, and that basically mirrors Title VII. So it prohibits sexual discrimination.
Okay.
And sexual harassment.
So Title VII is the one that we should all be aware of. We should all know that that is the legal foundation that protects us. So Gail, how can an employer kind of prevent egregious harassment, sexual harassment at the workplace? What do you want employers to be doing, Gail?
Okay. Well, employers should adopt policies that prohibit harassment in the first place. Those policies should have a complaint procedure, and they need to be shared with the employees. So the employees know how to behave and what to do if they are subject to or see behavior that is inappropriate. And then they also should train their employees.
Which is critical. And so, Gail, would you say, even again, for our startup community and our small business community, all the way up to large corporations, your advice is that every business entity must plan for these provisions and these trainings? No one gets a pass.
Absolutely. Well, it depends on the size of the employer.
Okay.
The laws that I just described to you have a minimum size.
Okay.
So under Title VII and under the Florida Civil Rights Act, if you have 15 or more employees, you're covered.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that small employers should go around harassing their employees. Of course not.
Right.
And there are local ordinances, including right here in the city of Sarasota, where the minimum number of employees is smaller.
Okay.
In Sarasota, if you have 5 employees, you're covered under the Anti-Discrimination, Anti-Harassment Act. So the smaller employers don't get a pass.
Yeah, no one gets a pass, right?
Exactly. And so planning ahead is good to have your policies, teach the employees what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah.
And how to treat each other. And part of that policies is not just put it in a book, have it signed, but you train the employees on how to behave. and
Yeah.
what to do if there is somebody's behavior that's inappropriate.
It just feels that this area of your expertise is so incredibly relevant. And this current climate we're in, again, we all desperately need legal counsel to navigate and those foundations to navigate how to treat all employees and how employers can prepare their staff, like you said, to work well with one another and prevent escalations and misbehavior. So what type of training do you recommend that an employer provide around sexual harassment? I mean, I don't know that people often really talk about this as openly as I think we all should. What should an employer do?
Sure. Employers should train their employees, and I'm talking all their employees, not just managers,
Mhm.
but everyone in the workforce. And they should be trained on diversity and appreciating diversity, as well as civility and harassment prevention.
Yeah, the civility and harassment. I wanted to hold there for a minute because I want our listeners to absorb that. Civility and harassment prevention, um, legal concepts, but also just should be the core of your business, right? We should all be striving for civility in the workplace. So I think it's really powerful that we all keep this as our top priority. You know, I also wanted to ask you, um, if I run a small business, I'm an employer, and I do receive like an internal complaint, or there's been some disclosure that there's been inappropriate conduct or harassment, you know, what should I do as a small business owner?
Well, I think you're going to be surprised when I tell you the first thing, because it's not one that just comes naturally. But if an employee comes forward to you to say that you have or they have been mistreated, you should thank them for coming forward, because only if you know about it can you do something about it.
Yeah.
So first, the employer should thank the employee for coming forward with her concern, and then the employer should initiate a prompt investigation into the allegations that are brought forward that might involve talking to other employees, looking at video if you have it, listening to conversations, reading emails or texts, things like that. Afterwards, when the investigation is completed, the employer should take prompt action. There may not be discipline necessary. A lot of harassment complaints are based on the perception of the alleged victim. Everyone sees things through their own eyes. So through the course of the investigation and talking to other people, the employer is going to learn a lot of information and may need to take discipline, may need to take other types of remedial action, may need to do more training.
Yeah.
Afterwards, the employer should follow back up with the person who complained. Let them know they conducted a prompt investigation. They are taking necessary action. They don't have to describe what it specifically is. And then there's some very important things. They need to tell the person who originally complained that if they believe they have suffered any more incidents of misbehavior, misconduct, they need to come forward to the employer and tell her. Because again, if we don't know about it, we can't do anything about it.
That's right.
And then also to remind the employee that she is not going to be subject to any retaliation.
Yeah.
Retaliation is prohibited. All of the witnesses need to be told that. The alleged harasser needs to be told that. And so the people need to be told not to do it and to report it if it happens.
Wow. So critical. And truthfully, I mean, I think many of us, certainly the Me Too era showed that many of us have experienced this. And so knowing that processes are there to help guide you as an employer, or if you were the victim of it, there are processes to follow and protections. And so, you know, I think, again, with you, I have like a gazillion more questions, but I wanted to finish, Gail, in talking about equal pay. So we had Abby Wambach on our stage last year, and Abby's really a crusader for pay equity, right? And we look across all sectors, and we just know whether it's law, athletics, like SoGal and the entrepreneurship kind of community, women are still lagging as it relates to equal pay. So I want to ask you a little bit about equal pay. I want to know, though, from the employer side, how, as an employer, if I'm a male employee, a female business owner, how do I make sure that I'm delivering equitable pay to my employees? What can I do to close these gaps?
Well, there are a number of best practices an employer can take, but the first thing that the employer needs to do is to analyze where the company stands.
Mhm.
We would highly recommend that that analysis be done in conjunction with counsel, because it will be privileged and confidential and not disclosable, which is important because it is likely you're going to come up with inequities. We don't need to broadcast them. We need to know about them so we can address them.
Yeah.
So first, I would suggest that the employer conduct a privileged pay audit, look into how they're paying, why they're paying, what they're paying, and then set some initial goals on how to address those inequities. After that, education is important. Some companies find it beneficial to be transparent about their pay. It's amazing how many companies tell their employees, don't talk about your pay.
Right.
Whether that is an actual lawful direction or not, I won't get into today.
Yeah.
I will tell you that we've had laws about that since the 1930s,
I
and
bet.
many employers break them.
Wow.
So transparency about pay can be helpful to eliminate inequities, and also training on how to set pay,
Mhm.
and how to promote, retain, and do other things.
Yeah.
There's other best practices in terms of recruitment.
Mhm.
We need to, as employers, set hiring goals. You can set hiring goals to promote diversity within your employment setting, whether that is by gender or it is by race or any other diverse characteristic. Another thing you'll hear about a lot these days is encouraging employers not to ask their applicants about their prior salaries or about their prior pay.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to make sense. How much were you making? I want to offer you more. So you
Right.
want to come to me, right? Well,
Yeah.
the problem is it's a cycle. If a woman is paid less, then she's going to continually paid less. If she tells the employer, well, I want $30,000.
Yeah.
Well, her male component says, well, I want $40,000. And so to get the male applicant, the employer might pay over 40 for the man, but over 30 for the woman. So it's encouraged not to ask about prior salary or
Yeah.
salary history. It's also a good idea to list your pay range on your job descriptions. Put
Mhm.
it on your job postings. That way everybody's in the same ballpark. Similarly, in the job descriptions, use gender friendly terms, or gender neutral terms is probably
Sure.
the better way to say it. You can source your applicants from diverse methods.
Mhm.
The word of mouth is probably the worst place to make a change,
Yeah.
because it's the same people recommending the same people. And you
Yes.
usually recommend like people rather than dissimilar.
Mhm.
You can also set some value driven pay ranges based on objective criteria. You're less likely to have these subjective decisions made. I also mentioned retention. Retention is important. If you hire women, you want to keep them working for you.
Yes.
And so you need to do things to help make them want to stay. You can set goals on retaining at certain levels. Again, transparency is a good idea. Have leadership statements so that they know that the company wants to promote diversity and retain people working there. Adding flexible schedules, if that's something that is going to impact women staying. And a paid parental leave policy is always a good idea. I did not say maternity leave. I
Yeah.
said parental leave. So men get leave for families, women get leave for families. The last one is advancement. You have the women working, you want them to advance and be promoted within your company. It's a good idea for employers to analyze the equality of work distribution and also promotion eligibility, and to set objective success goals. So it is not the aggressive person who gets it, but the person who achieves objective criteria and they can apply regardless of whether the person is male, female, purple, green, it doesn't really matter.
Oh my goodness. I feel like that response, first of all, was so amazing. And actually, it could be an entire book that I want you to write. Because those steps that you just outlined, and again, for those of you who are joining, we'll try to recap over here in the chat. Those are so powerful. Those actionable, how can I close these gaps through my intentional and strategic diversity, equity, inclusion planning and high expectations and policies and procedures. Gail, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm really just grateful that you are in this space as a strong female attorney, you know, with all of your clients, including us, but also just sharing today with our listeners some new ways to think about pay equity going forward. And so thanks again, Gail. Honestly, these three attorneys are so powerhouse. So I next have the privilege of introducing Elizabeth Stamoulis. Liz is a partner at Williams Parker Corporate Practice, and she serves as the firm's intellectual property practice leader. So after graduating from Dartmouth College, summa cum laude, Liz received her JD from Stanford Law School. With a background in the arts, Liz enjoys helping companies and individuals protect their creative works, proprietary information, and goodwill, and helping work with day-to-day corporate advice. Liz was named as this year's Young Professional of the Year for the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce and has been featured in the Business Observer's 40 Under 40. She's kind of on fire. As a professional Greek dancer, you may have seen Liz performing in the closing ceremonies of the 2004 Summer Olympics in Athens, Greece. Oh my goodness, you've got some range. I love this. Liz, you're awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I love your backstory.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's just such a privilege. All three of you are just so phenomenal. And what I love about your backstory, again, 40 under 40, kind of coming into your own with this legal expertise, and that you did a little cameo in the Summer Olympics. We may have to find that, you guys. We have to find that footage. But, you know, Liz, I want to begin by talking about intellectual property. And for some of our younger listeners or those that are kind of transitioning into the business world, we have a lot of those folks in our network. Can you tell us what is intellectual property and like, why does it matter for businesses and for women in particular?
Sure. So people use the phrase intellectual property all the time and they don't always know what it means. So typically when people say intellectual property, they're talking about 4 different areas. It's trademarks, patents, copyrights, or trade secrets. But that doesn't really tell you what they protect. So when I think about intellectual property, I think about the business and its goodwill, its brand, the product it's creating, really anything that makes the business work better or makes its product better. Those are all things that can be protected by intellectual property. And that's really important. A lot of people think, oh, IP, it's just for tech companies or just for software companies. No, every company has something to protect. Its brand, its secret sauce that makes that company better than its competitor.
Gosh, yeah.
And so it's important for all businesses, but it's really important for women to think about. You geeked out on some numbers earlier, so I'm going to geek out a little more. The Patent and Trademark Office recently released a study on women in IP in particular, and they said that only 13% of all inventors that receive patents are women. And it's even fewer when you look at if they're the primary inventor. And there's some studies that show that women who are submitting patents are 42% less likely to get their patent to go through. Okay. So there's a lot of questions about why this happens. And, you know, there are some obvious answers, like there are fewer women in STEM and the sciences, and therefore they're less likely to be inventors in the first place, and therefore less likely to have patents. But I think there are some less obvious answers there too. And one of them is women are sometimes less likely to be recognized for their contributions and sometimes less likely to ask for recognition for their contributions. I think that's a really important takeaway for the listeners, to just know what intellectual property is, know the value it has, be able to recognize it, and know when you have something worth value, and know to ask for recognition when you have it.
Gosh, I love that answer. I think it's so critical. And certainly you and I shared before the segment that I've had my own journey in the nonprofit sector, you know, just some challenges and trying to lean in and have some IP protection. And we're going to link an article and some resources that Liz is providing for those of our friends here in the nonprofit sector. You should and must be thinking about your IP. But that leads me to the next question. So, like, what actual documents and processes should a business have in place to protect their IP?
Sure. So on the IP side, the first thing you should do is conduct an IP audit. Just look at your business and try to identify those types of things that I mentioned and see what's important to you, what's critical to your business and its success, and how you should protect it. Another thing to think about is owning the intellectual property that your employees and your contractors are creating. That doesn't automatically happen. And that's something that Gail and I would work with closely together to make sure those documents are in place, to make sure that you get the ownership at the end of the day. And then before, I didn't even touch on all the stuff on the internet in terms of websites and social media accounts and domain names. Make sure you have all those things in place. Make sure you own them. Make sure you own the content on them. And then on the business side, this is touching a little bit on what Nicole was talking about earlier. Make sure you have all your documents in place. Make sure you have an entity. Make sure you have your governance documents, especially if you have multiple owners. Think about, you know, if somebody wants to transfer their units, are they allowed to? If somebody gets divorced, what happens to their units? Do you want to be in business with their ex? You know, how does money get into the business? How does money come out of the business? All of those things that are really important to talk about. And they're important to talk about when everybody's getting along. You don't want to be having that conversation when nobody's getting along. So it's important to think about on the front end.
Yes.
And then the last thing I'll mention, and I think a lot of this will be talked about in the checklist that I'll be giving you, but the other thing is contracts, which Nicole mentioned. So make sure you have contracts in place for your business. You know, all companies have customers and vendors and suppliers, and they all have their own form of contract, and they are happy to give them to you. But make sure you have your own that works for your business, that addresses the issues that you know are important to you. And then you can use that as a base, or at least as a starting discussion point, to make sure that those issues are addressed in your documents. So then you're protected on the back end, should it ever come to a dispute.
And it's just so critical. I mean, all of you are talking, and I hope our listeners are hearing it, like this need to plan up front, this need to have conversations with our business partners, our startup, our investors. Certainly it's all relevant, and as it relates to IP and idea ownership. So the question I was going to say is, you know, or I was going to ask you about how a company makes sure it owns IP, right? And so how do I make sure my small business owns IP that either I've created or my employee has created? So do we automatically own it? Like if we've paid for it and we were the creative, you know, inspiration behind it, can you talk about ownership?
I get this question a lot, and people hear the phrase work for hire a lot and assume that just because they paid for something, they own it. And that's not always the way it works. So I'm glad we have a chance to talk about it. So especially when it comes to patents and copyrights, the default is the individual who created the item owns it. So unless there's something else going on, some sort of agreement or other arrangement, it's the individual, not the company, that owns it. Huge. So two things to know. One, and this is specifically in the copyright area for work made for hire. One, if it's an employee within the scope of their employment, then it's much more likely that they own it. But the wrinkle is that companies rarely use their own employees to create copyrightable works. And so these are things like your website, or your social media posts, or your logo, or documents that you might be creating internally. A lot of times those things get outsourced. Mm-hmm. And so if it's an independent contractor, it's a whole different ballgame. You have to have an agreement, a signed writing with them saying that it's a work made for hire. But even that's not enough. It needs to fall into one of a very specific list of 9 categories. And I won't bore you with them, but they are very niche. And I can tell you, rarely does it fall into that category. So even if you have a contract, that might not be enough. So these are really important things to think about up front, making sure you own the intellectual property. If it's not a work made for hire, have an agreement in place. And frankly, even if you think it is a work made for hire, still have an agreement in place. That just It takes out all of the guesswork at the end of the day. It's very clear who owns it, what everyone's rights are to it. And then again, you just avoid issues on the back end.
That is so, first of all, I love that. And that is something we mutually agree we must geek out over. So let me just ask one follow-up to that. Because so many in the entrepreneurial community, including us, contract with those who help create content, you're telling us very specifically we must have documents up front before the collaboration begins to specify the creative role, the ownership role as it relates to a social media post, a website, a video, like explicit documentation.
That would be my recommendation. If especially if the person isn't an employee, but even if they are, a document just makes it so much clearer. And these days with technology changing, there's so many different platforms, the law cannot keep up with it. So,
Yeah.
you know, today it's social media, tomorrow it's some other new invention,
Right.
and maybe the law might not cover that. So just having an agreement in place that contemplates complete ownership by the company is key. And I'll mention having all of these things that I'm talking about today are important for a lot of reasons. One is just protecting your property and the value in your company. Two, protecting against liability. But then also three, which a lot of people don't think about, is your exit, right? So most people, the whole point of building their company is sometimes to sell it for millions of dollars and then you go retire on the beach somewhere.
Right,
And
in
having all
Sarasota.
of this yes, exactly. So having all of this in place helps you get there. If a buyer comes and sees that you have all of your documents in place, they're going to be really happy. It's going to make the process go a lot smoother, and you maybe even get more money out of it.
Okay, so that's brilliant. So I love that because one of my mentors is constantly working with me around exit strategy, like within the first 6 months of launch. And so entrepreneurs, women, business owners, it's important that we all are thinking, as Liz just told us, about our exit. Are we planning to keep this forever? Do we want this to be a family business? Do we want to cash out? Do we want to position ourselves? And I would suspect most of us in the for-profit space, when we talk about our exit, we want the most value. And so what I hear you saying is for a potential owner or acquisition, the more we have our IP like established, so it would increase the value of our company.
Not just the IP, but really just all the T's crossed and I's dotted. They love coming in. All your corporate documents are together. You have all your contracts signed with all your customers. You've built up the value in your IP and it's all registered. It makes the legal process go much more smoothly, and people are often willing to pay more for it because the business just has more value.
Beautiful. That's such stellar advice. Other inside tips that you want us to know as business owners, if we could, I know we only have a few more minutes, but what other inside tips could you share with us?
I deal with this a lot. People come in, and it's often with trademarks. There are a lot of misconceptions. So I love having the opportunity to just drop a few tidbits.
Good.
So the big one is, especially with trademarks, it is disfavored under trademark law to protect descriptive marks. So a lot of people come in and they say, I started a business or I have a new brand. I got a great name. It exactly describes what we do. And that's great from a marketing standpoint. People love a mark that it immediately tells the customer who you are and what you do. But from a trademark standpoint, those are so hard to protect because we can't let people protect descriptive marks that their competitors need to use, right? If I'm an Apple store and I want to call myself Apple Company, I can't stop other people who sell apples from calling themselves Apple companies. So now it's much harder to protect by brand. So that's one thing to keep in mind just up front when you're picking your name or launching a new brand. Think about the mark and its protectability. The other thing to think about is it's possible to have trademark rights without registering it. So you might pick a mark and fall in love with it, and even search the Patent and Trademark Office records and see no one else is using it. But it's possible someone else is out there that didn't register and they might have created rights that you're now infringing and you don't even know. And even more so, for trademark infringement, the marks don't need to be identical. They just need to be similar. So even if you do search the patent and trademark records, it's possible that even if you didn't find someone using an identical mark, you could still be infringing somebody's mark if it's similar enough to be confusing. So these are really important things to do on the front end, because what I hate to see is a client picks a brand, puts all this time, money, and energy into building it up, building out their website, all of their marketing materials. And then I tell them, you're really at risk for infringing this other company. And then they have a choice to make then. So I love for business owners to know this on the front end to
Yes.
avoid the pitfalls.
Oh, it's
The other
critical.
thing I see is with domain names. A lot of people will pick a trademark, again, put all the time and energy into it, and then the domain name isn't available, or vice versa. They go out and buy all the domain names and the trademark isn't available. So just make sure you're thinking about all of that together, and you'll set yourself up for success.
Oh my, it's such important advice. And honestly, I think these are the kind of details and planning that we want our women in business community to have on their radar and to execute. You know, Liz, we're short on time, and I know our listeners are going to continue to get to know you and the firm as you partner with us for the summit. You know, I wanted to end though with a question. We talked about the kind of gender disparity in the law profession. And I wonder how you think we could get more girls and more women who to pursue law and to pursue a legal career. Do you have any thoughts on that from your experience?
For those who have an inclination towards the law, I think it can be a very fulfilling career. I very much enjoy it. You can probably tell what I do. I really get into it. And in my area in particular, I find that I'm always learning. It's always changing. Technology is moving at a rapid pace. So it's always something new every day. I get to work with all different types of businesses, which is really nice. So I learn all different industries. And you get to help people build their career, build their company, or individuals, build their life. And that's just a really rewarding piece of it. So I think the legal career in general can be really rewarding. For women in particular, we've talked a lot today about disparities and representation. I think representation is so important. So even for those who are looking to become lawyers, it's so important for us as the female lawyers right now to be there for them, to show them what it can be. And it's important to be an example of their potential. And just getting closer to breaking the glass ceiling. You talked about those statistics at the top, and they sound kind of sad, they're low, but like Nicole said, the numbers are actually getting better every year after year. More and more women are graduating from law school. They're actually outnumbering the men right now. So with every generation, it's getting better. And so we currently are hopefully inspiring, future generations to become lawyers and showing them what it can be. And hopefully they'll become lawyers and inspire the next generation, and just every generation making it better.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I mean, honestly, the three of you are an inspiration. You're an inspiration to all of us in the business community. But to your point, I think women of all ages, young, midlife, career changers, are absolutely going to flock to your profession. I think women can and are thriving, and you three are such a phenomenal example of why and how women can excel in law. Ladies, thank you so much. Nicole, Gail, Liz, Williams Parker, thank you for being our featured Let's Lawyer Up speakers today. I am so grateful on behalf of our team and our listeners and the community, the SoGal community, the Voice and Visibility Women's Summit, and all of us that are striving for promoting success for women in business. And you have enlightened us and inspired us, and continue to trailblaze in your profession, and inspire a lot of girls and women along the way. So I thank you. I thank you for your time, for all the hard work and dignity and integrity that you put into your profession every single day. Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you're lawyered up. And we are going to share with you in the end here, the Williams Parker contact information, as well as some wonderful resources that their team is going to share, so that you are positioned to consider all of these important legal elements as you establish your business on your business journey. So thanks again to everybody, and we'll see you soon.